right? So let's discuss what exactly the ledger is, and after that we will do some configuration on the same. Okay, so let me just open an Excel sheet. Okay, let me just open an Excel sheet. Okay, now what is ledger? What is a ledger? So ledger, now I have a company code in US. I have one more company code in India, one company code in Singapore, and one more company code in Australia. Let's say I have four company codes. Now, India follows Indian gap. US follows US gap. Singapore follows, let us assume, IFRS. And Australia follows AU gap. Let us assume. It means each of these company codes are preparing their financial books according to their local requirement. They're not following a uniform across all these company codes. Because if they want to use, let's say if the uniform is something like, Companies Act, if I'm just saying as Companies Act. So this is the uniform. If I want to follow the Companies Act for all these company codes, then that will be a legal issue from the respective country. So the respective country gives a certain guidelines which we have to follow. I mean, which the company code, the relevant company code has to follow. Those guidelines have to be adopted. Okay, now I cannot go with one uniformed accounting procedure for all these company codes spreading across four different countries. Now, how can I meet? I want US, for US company code, I want US gap to be applied. I want for Indian company in Indian gap. IFRS in the case of Singaporean company code. And similarly for Australian company code, I want AU gap to be maintained. So if, what exactly the difference in this course? In this case, first thing is maybe US gap wants Jan to December. Indian gap April to March. Singapore gap says July to June. Australian gap says April to let's say May to April. May have different fiscal year. Or US gap may say 10% depreciation on particular asset, but Indian gap says it should be 12%. IFRS says 20%. Then Australia says probably 25%. It means you may have some difference in some of the activities, or you may have certain other process like taxes. Taxes might differ, right? You may have certain changes from one principle to the other principle. Now, how can I meet this requirement in SAP? In order to make this, we will be using a concept called ledger. It means we will be creating a separate ledger for meeting these. Okay, so in the case of ledger, we have basically 2 points. First is the leading ledger, second is non-leading ledger. Non-leading ledger, leading ledger and non-leading ledger. The leading ledger, the creation of leading ledger is mandatory. We need to create leading ledger, that is compulsory. leading ledger has to be created for each of the company codes compulsorily, whereas non-leading ledger is an optional. So when it is required, when the non-leading ledger is required, non-leading ledger is required specifically in these areas. Or we may have the other scenario also. Like let's say we have a company code in India. As per Indian rules, Companies Act to be followed. Okay, Companies Act to be followed. But the company code in India also wants to see the financial reports as per IT. It means income tax, as per income tax. It means Indian company code wants the financial statements in two ways, as per Companies Act and as per Income Tax Act. So the company code in India wants to see the financial statements in two ways. So in such a case, we will be using the non-leading ledger concept. Non-leading ledger. Okay, so we will be creating one more non-leading ledger for income tax purpose. Now, I'm just ignoring this at the moment. Now I'm going with the current example. So in order to meet their local requirement, all these company codes must and should maintain their own non-leading ledger. Leading ledger going to be the common for all these company codes. Why? Because all these company codes are connected to one group company. So, so non-leading ledger will be, we will have separate non-leading ledger for all these four company codes, but we will have only one leading ledger. The code normally is 0L. 0L is the code which we will be using the standard ledger, standard leading ledger. And apart from that, we may have multiple ledgers called non-leading ledgers. Remember, the code accepts only two digits. For this ledger, it accepts only two digits. So 0L. You can create any number or alpha. It can be a combination of alpha numeric. You can have your ledger either in the form of numeric or in the form of alpha, or you can consider both. Okay, so but 0L is going to be the leading ledger. That's a standard SAP standard. All company codes should have this non-leading ledger maintained. Apart from this non-leading ledger, we may create few other non-leading ledgers to meet their local requirements. Now, for each of these non-leading ledgers, we will be assigning something called accounting principles. What are these accounting principles? Like US GAAP is one of the accounting principles. Indian GAAP, IFRS, AU GAAP. So these are all nothing but different accounting principles. It means we have certain other rules for specific, the accounting principle. As per IFRS, the depreciation on furniture should be 10%, but Indian GAAP says 12%. It means you will have some variation when you observe the business transaction closely. Okay, so that is what the accounting principle. It means for each of these ledgers, whether it is a leading or non-leading, we will be assigning the relevant accounting principle. So that is what we will be doing here in the ledger posting. Any questions? Okay, so let's jump on to the configuration. And if you see the configuration, you will find certain other things like like underlying ledger, okay, then predictive ledger, simulation ledger, like we can see multiple things. What happened to this? Okay, so I'm just going into SPRO, financial accounting, financial accounting global settings, ledgers, ledger, and define settings for ledgers and currency types. So in ECC, we just have in ECC, this ledger is one of the new GL concepts. As we discussed, what are there in new GL concepts? One is document splitting, second is parallel ledger. It is also known as parallel valuation. Third is parallel currencies. Fourth is online reconciliation between CO and FI. These are the four things that we have as part of new GL concepts. So the ledger, in the case of ledger, we used to have leading ledgers and non-leading ledgers. That's it. This was there until ECC, but in S4 we have some more ledgers, simulation ledger, all those stuff. Okay, now let's see all of them. And the transaction code is also changed here. Fins VC underscore ledger. There is a change on the on the transaction code as well. But of course, that is not that much required important at the moment. Okay, define settings for ledgers and currency types. IMG, financial accounting global settings, ledgers, ledger, define settings for ledgers and currency types. Execute. Again, system is slowed down. Okay. Allocations indicator should not be empty. Ledger, zero company code. Of course, something is missing, but that's fine. Not for our company codes. That's fine. Just enter. Okay. So if you see over here, currency types, just double click on currency types, These are the currency types that we have. Basically, 00 is a document currency. Okay, this is the one that we will have to see. 10 is a company code currency. 20 is a controlling area currency. 30 group currency. 40 hard currency. Then 60 low global company currency, and there is 90, which is profit center invoice currency. These are all the standard. Remaining all are created. Okay, so 00 the document currency, 10 company code currency, 20 controlling area, 30 group currency, 40 hard currency, 60 global company currency, and 90 profit center currency. 90 profit center invoice currency. Okay, right. These are all the standard ones. Got it? So basically, we have these standard. We will just go ahead using the same thing.
Hello, Nada.
Yes.
Sorry, one quick question. If
Mm-hmm.
you go to the bottom on the right where it says A4H
Huh?
1800, if you
Sorry.
if you go to the bottom right, at the down, right, down, no, down, come down, come, no, don't scroll down. I mean, where it says A4H 1800, where you can see the T code at the bottom of,
This one. Okay. Okay.
can you make it show, yes, like that? Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Sorry about that.
No. No problem. Okay. So these are the currencies that we have as part of the standard. Now, global currency conversion settings. We are not doing anything now because this is part of the currencies. We will discuss them later, but just I'm going through them. Global currency conversion settings. Here you can see now. This 10 is nothing but a company code currency. 10 is nothing but a company code currency. 20 is controlling area currency. Like we have the other currencies, we can maintain them. Now, if I talk about company code currency, how does it happen? How does it work? As per this 00, which is nothing but document currency, right? What is document currency? Let's say we have our company code in US. So our company code currency going to be USD, but I'm posting a transaction using Euro currency, or I'm posting a transaction using Australian dollar. So the Australian dollar or Euro currencies called document currencies. It means the currency other than the company code currency. That's nothing but document currency. In the case of company code currency, both document currency and company code currencies are same. But other than the company code currency, you will have a difference. It means company code currency going to be USD, whereas document currency going to be Euro, Australian dollar, Singapore dollar, or Indian rupees. It can be anything. Okay, now how do you want this to happen? First, what I'm telling, I want to consider source. Whether the source currency, company code currencies are same, different, it's immaterial at the moment. Now, first, what we are doing, I'm asking the system to check what is the document currency. Now, what is the document currency? If it says a Singaporean dollar, whereas our company code currency is USD, when the source currency and company code currencies are different, then it will go and check this entire process. What it says, exchange rate type, standard translation at average. In the case standard translation at average rate, it means M. So whatever the exchange rate I maintain between the document currency and company code currency, for this exchange rate type M, the same thing will be considered. It means the exchange rate between Singaporean dollar and US dollar, whatever the exchange rate we maintain. So what system does is the document currency, it means Singaporean dollar will get converted into US dollar. So how does it happen? It is based on the exchange rate type between Singaporean dollar USD maintained for this M. M is nothing but average rate. So we have, like that, we have standard selling rate, purchasing rate, we will have different rates. Okay, but M is going to be the average rate, which is what we will be considering. Of course, we will discuss this part little later. Okay, so M, whatever the exchange rate I maintain, the same thing will be considered. And do you want to consider translation date or document date or posting date? Which date do you want to consider? Okay, translation date is the date normally it is considered as a posting date. Whatever the posting date it is, the same will be considered as a translation date if we don't enter any date as translation date. What does it mean? What is the meaning of a translation date? Translation date is the date the system consider the exchange rate whatever we maintain on the date that should be considered here in the case of translation date. It means translation date is the date system considers the exchange rate based on this translation date. So translation date is the date which will be considered as a base. Suppose I just give an example. While I'm posting, I have entered document date as 1st January, posting date as 10th January, and translation date as 20th January. It means the exchange rate, whatever we maintain between Singapore dollar and USD on this translation date, it means 20th January, system will consider that as a translation date and consider the exchange rate while posting the transaction. Suppose I have entered document date as 1st January, posting date as 10th January, and I did not enter anything in the translation date. So if we don't enter anything, system will take the value from the posting date. So posting date is going to be 10th January. So whatever the exchange rate we maintained on 10th January, system will consider the same thing. Okay, so that is important. So if we don't enter anything in the translation date, system consider posting date as a translation date and accordingly considers the exchange rate whatever we maintained for the posting date for exchange rate type M. M is nothing but moving average or average rate. Real time conversion. So we will be doing this based on the prevailing exchange rate. So we will be considering this one. Okay, we will understand this little information during our during our parallel currencies concept. Then currency conversion settings for company codes. Double click on currency conversion settings for company codes. Just enter. Here we will have different company codes. Okay, 1248 is our company code. System is damn slow. Okay, I'm entering company code 1248, and if you see over here, so if you see over here, we are not finding our company code because we have not yet configured the parallel currency thing at all. Okay, so 1248, we are not finding that record at all here. Okay, coming to the ledger. So double click on the ledgers. Okay, now if you see over here, 0L is the standard ledger. We call it as leading ledger. The creation of 0L, I mean, the leading ledger is mandatory. Without leading ledger, we cannot do any transaction. We cannot post any transaction. So 0L maintaining 0L and assigning it to our company code is mandatory. This is compulsory. But creating the other ledgers, as I mentioned, non-leading ledgers, which is an optional. Based on the business requirement, we will be doing. Now I'm just selecting 0L. Here it mentioned as a leading ledger, and the ledger type I did mention as standard ledger. Apart from the standard ledger, we can see extension ledger. What are these extension ledgers? Okay, what are these extension ledgers? So this extension ledger, and you can also see the next is called underlying ledger. Underlying ledger. So what is the importance of extension ledger? As I mentioned earlier, in the case of leading and non-leading ledger, the moment we post a transaction, it will get updated in all ledgers, leading ledgers and non-leading ledgers. Suppose if you want to specify posting a transaction to a particular ledger, then we will be creating a ledger group and posting the transaction. Now, what is happening if I post a transaction and updating in all ledgers? It is becoming a duplicate entry. Okay, it is becoming a duplicate. It is a duplicate entry because the same entry is being updated in all ledgers, including leading and non-leading ledger. But I don't want particular transactions to be updated in specific ledgers. I want a particular transaction to be updated only in particular ledger. Okay. Apart from that, say here I have 0L. Okay. 0L for this AK. I'm just giving an example here, AK. What happens if I have a ledger group created just for this AK, and whenever I want to post a transaction, I can post only transactions in AK. So with that, it will not get updated into the other ledgers. Now, when I mention it as an extension ledger, and when I say it is a 0L is my underlying ledger, what happens with this? Whatever are the transactions that are posting in 0L, those will get updated in 0L ledger as well as AK ledger. So underlying ledger is the ledger system will consider the transactions and put into the ledger. This is called the regular ledger, and this is called underlying ledger. It means transactions whatever are we posting in 0L will also be get updated in AK. So it means we want the data details from 0L also in AK. So AK will take care of the transaction specifically posted to AK, and it also it takes the data from 0L. Any questions? So the concept of extension ledger is nothing but in order to avoid duplicates. So what is happening if I have a leading ledger and if I have four non-leading ledger, it means altogether I have five ledgers. Whenever I'm posting any transaction, the particular transaction will get updated in all these five ledgers. So what is happening with this? It means the same data is getting updated in four ledgers. So with that, what happens is our storage capacity will become, will be, I mean, it requires a lot of space. I mean, the same transaction will be stored in five different, what do you call, different ledgers and occupies more space. So to avoid that, we have a concept called extension ledger. This is just for spacing only. And apart from that, I don't want certain transactions to be updated in all other ledgers. I want just to specific ledgers. So in such a case, we can use them here. Okay, we can use them over here. So that is the concept of extension ledger. And if you see over here, it is just as mentioned as standard ledger or extension ledger. But when you go here, you will be finding multiple ledgers: simulation ledger, predictive ledger, valuation.
Question, please.
Yes.
Okay. For the, if you saying that if you have leading ledger and non-leading ledger. So if you have four non-leading ledger and you want to post into just two
Mm-hmm.
leading ledger,
Mm-hmm.
and you already assigned the four leading ledger, I mean, you already assigned the four non-leading ledger to this leading ledger, and you don't want two to be updated. You just want, out of the four, you want only two to
Mm-hmm.
be updated. How do you go about that?
So if you don't have extension ledger, that's what you're saying, right?
What I'm saying is, if you have four non-leading ledger,
Uh-huh.
and and from the four, you want only two to be updated.
Okay. So what we will have to do in such a case is, I mean, if you don't have extension ledger, this concept, what we used to do in ECC, we used to create ledger groups. Concept called ledger groups is being used. Under the ledger group, we would be assigning only those two ledgers in it. And while posting the transaction, we will be considering the ledger group, and based on the ledger group, whatever the ledgers that are there within that ledger group, all will get updated. Let me take an example here. Now, let me take one example. Let's say we have 0L, 1L, 2L, 3L, 4L. Let's say we have, this is a leading ledger and this is non-leading ledger. Let us assume, okay, non-leading ledger. Now I have a transaction called debit salaries, credit, let's say bank. The amount is, let's say, $1,000. Now the requirement in this case is it has to trigger in 0L and 2L only. Now, if I don't consider this thing, if I just post a transaction, this $1,000 transaction will get updated in all these ledgers. But business does not want that. Business wants these transactions to be posted only in 0L 2L. So what we will have to do is we have a concept called ledger group. I'll create ledger group as XY. So within that XY, I will have 0L and 2L. Now what I will do while posting the transaction in SAP, debit expenses credit bank with 1,000 on the top at the header level, we will have a field called group ledger group. So the moment I assign ledger group as XY, the system considers 0L 2L only, and while posting the transaction, this will get updated only in 0L 2L. It will not get updated in all other non-leading ledgers because we are specifying here. We are specifying here. Now, the concept here is the concept whatever we have here is underlying ledger 0L. It means if I just consider AK in my reports, it picks up the AK transactions posted directly into AK and as well as 0L transactions. All these will be picked up there in that. Okay, that is the meaning. So what it does in this case is 0L will occupy 0L transactions will occupy some space and AK also will occupy some space. But when you go deeply, so AK will occupy some space and 0L whatever the space it has originally the same will be copied here. It means it does not take additional database for capturing zero values. And when I want to see my reports at AK level, I can see AK values as well as 0L values. And in this case, 0L values for this AK specifically to AK will not hold any space. This is nothing but a statistical kind of space. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to tell you here is the extension ledger concept is just to save the space in the database. Whereas if you consider just parallel ledgers, it will update in both the ledgers and you can see the space occupied for these two values. But whereas in the case of extension ledger, the space will not be occupied. There won't be any space for 0L when I talk about AK. It means when I talk about AK, system will trigger not only the AK values, since AK also has 0L as underlying ledger, it will also trigger 0L values. And typically 0L will not hold any space in this case. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so if you see over here extension ledger and you can see the underlying ledger. So underlying ledger, it means A6 not only captures the data of A6, but it also captures DeFi data. That is the meaning. And remember one thing that we will have only one ledger called leading ledger. We will have only one ledger called leading ledger. Remaining all are called non-leading ledgers. Okay, I'm just selecting 0L and double clicking on company code settings. Did I make any change here? This is going to be standard ledger. Did I make? We should not consider it as a extension ledger. I don't know whether someone has created it or what.
You made a change when you.
Oh, is it so? Okay.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I'm not saving it. So define settings for ledgers and currency type. Again, I'm going into there. Okay, standard ledger. That's perfect. Okay, selecting 0L and double click on company code settings for ledgers. Then if you see over here, position 1248, you can see it over here. Why I'm saying 0L is mandatory? Because it is a leading ledger. By default, as soon as you create your company code, right, you will have this 0L assigned here. We are not going to do anything here. We are not going to assign it over here. If you see over here, you will not be finding new entries at all. You don't have an option to add here under the leading ledger. But if you go into the non-leading ledger, you'll find the same thing. Since it is a 0L leading ledger, assignment of leading ledger to company code is mandatory. It means by default you will see 0L, I mean our company code. Earlier we came here and we saw 10 local currency, but we were not finding the global currency. We went to controlling area, activated the maintain controlling area. Then we came back here, we found 30. Remember, we did this. Now the point is, even during that time, I did not maintain this company code for this ledger because it is a mandatory. As soon as we activate our company code, it will come and update over here with the currency whatever we maintained for our company code in the company code configuration. Okay, so we don't have an option to change here. Sorry, we don't have an option to maintain new entries. It means by default, it will get updated over here. Now to this ledger 0L, select our company code, double click on accounting principles. This is what I was referring to. What is this accounting principle? So we discussed about IFRS. We discussed about US GAAP, Indian GAAP, Australian GAAP. So these are all nothing but different accounting principles. These are all nothing but different accounting principles. Each accounting principle follows certain set of rules governed by the government, governed by the Companies Act or whatever that country's regulation as per this their country's regulation. There are certain other situations, right? We will have to show specifically. It means one country says provide depreciation on furniture. Other country may not say that. The other country says purchase there won't be any depreciation on the furniture, but one country says provide depreciation. Similarly, interest rate says as 10% one country, the other country says 5%. Depreciation rate may be 10% in one company code, in another country it may be 12%. The asset is same, but rates are different in two different countries. Why we can find such differences? Just because of these accounting principles. Okay, selecting the company code, double clicking on accounting principle to see if at all we have any accounting principle. So for 0L, we don't have any accounting principle. Let's go back to ledger. Okay, this is about the leading ledger. Coming to the non-leading ledger, we have different non-leading ledgers. We can create our own, or if you want, we can use the existing ones. Let's create one. So what code shall we give? I'll say 0L, right? I'll put 1L. Okay, I will put 1L. So going into new entries, I'll say 1L, non-leading ledger. This is not a leading ledger, so don't select it. Ledger type, is it a standard ledger or extension ledger? What kind of this ledger is going to be? If I say standard ledger, this is a standard non-leading ledger. Okay, this is just a standard non-leading ledger. It is just like our 0L. I'm going back to, I'll tell you the difference here. Oh my god. Right, 0L is a leading ledger, right? It is just a leading ledger. And in the case of non-leading ledger, we are not selecting the leading ledger, but we are saying as a standard ledger. What is the difference between these two things? It is a leading ledger, it is a non-leading ledger. Whenever I'm posting any transaction, it will get updated in both the ledgers since I don't have any underlying ledger. It will get updated in both the ledgers. It means it stores the data in both of these ledgers, which occupies more space. Duplicate of entries, I would say. And when you see the next, this is also the other ledger, but it is not a leading ledger. It is mentioned as a standard ledger. And since we don't have underlying ledger, it means the moment I post any transaction to the company code, if these three ledgers are linked to our company code, the transaction will get updated in these three ledgers. Okay, so in order to, I mean, if you want to show them as a typical non-leading ledger, we will be selecting it as a standard ledger. Or I don't want of that kind. I just want a non-leading ledger with extension. Yes, that is also possible. So I'm just selecting the zero. Of course, we have completed already this thing. 0L, we have went into company code and we have seen. Now I want to create a non-leading ledger 1L. I say non-leading ledger, or I will say IFRS. So based on this, I will understand, yes, this ledger is something relating to IFRS. It is not a leading ledger. It is it is an extension ledger, or you can select standard ledger. If you just select as a standard ledger, already exists, it seems. So I'll say AL. Yeah, AL is not there. So I've just mentioned as a standard ledger, then this is going to be my one of the non-leading ledgers, which will take care of the entire details of the transactions. Now, as I mentioned, valuations, we have three valuations: legal valuation, group valuation, profit center valuation. This concept comes into picture in the case of transfer pricing. So by default, we will be considering it as a legal valuation. Okay, I want to consider one more called US GAAP, but this time I'll consider it as an extension ledger. Okay, extension ledger. No underlying ledger assigned to a ledger. BL requires an underlying ledger. Okay, it is not compulsory, but why are we maintaining the why are we maintaining this extension ledger? In order to save our space. So it is, in a way, it is important for us to maintain an underlying ledger. Okay, just enter here extension ledger. Within the extension ledger, again, extension ledger type, we have multiple: simulation, predictive ledger. Predictive ledger is the commonly used, in the latest, the latest versions. I don't know whether still we have this thing properly activated, but we will see now. Okay, so apart from the extension ledger, we have simulation ledger, prediction ledger, and valuation. So I'm just selecting the extension ledger. I'm selecting the underlying ledger as AL, or I will say 0L. It means 0L transactions are also considered here in the case of BL. As usual, I'll say legal valuation. See here, postings not allowed, manual postings not allowed. It means you are not allowed to post any transactions directly to this BL, directly to this BL. It means the data comes from, of course, we don't have an option to do, we have an option to consider the uh, what do you call, ledger groups, we can post using that, but we don't have we don't have an option to enter transactions directly post manually. So I'm just selecting this. I just selected over here. I'm just selecting F1 to understand more. Manual postings not allowed to ledgers, there is no information at all. So we cannot use this ledger for posting transactions manually. Okay, we don't have any other message other than this. Okay, just I'm saving it. Valuation view 0 of ledger BL different from underlying ledger. We'll see that later. I mean, uh, probably 0L may not have any legal valuation, so that is the reason why it it is giving that message. But normally we will maintain the valuation, legal valuation. So if you want to keep there blank, here also you need to keep it blank. It is just giving a warning message, that's it. It does not influence anything. What happened? Okay, so I want to show in the meantime, until it is saved, I want to show the transaction codes for posting ledgers. FB50 is the normal one. Here you can see FB50L. L is for ledger. Double click over here, you can see ledger group. So if you consider a ledger group here and posting this transaction, once we post the transaction, whatever are the ledgers maintained for this ledger group will come into picture, and it will get updated in all those ledgers. Okay, just enter, save it. So what we have done, we have our own leading ledger, and we have created two other non-leading ledger. One is purely a leading ledger, the other one is called extension ledger. So the underlying ledger for the extension ledger is 0L. If you see the message over here, ledger group BL is created only with the ledger BL. That is the standard in S4 system. It was not the case in ECC. We used to create manually. That we will discuss later. This is not important at the moment. Okay. Now we go back to 0L. Yeah, here valuation view is blank here. And when you see here AL and BL, it has a legal valuation. Mainly the reason we got that message because of this BL. Why? Because the underlying ledger is 0L. So 0L properties are also being captured here in this. So system gave us a warning message. Now for this AL and BL, we can maintain in the company codes. Select AL, double click on company code settings. Now if you see, you don't have company codes maintained automatically. You need to do that using new entries. Okay, go to new entries. Our company code is 1248. Okay, now which is the fiscal year that we are following? As I said earlier, just little while ago, if at all we have different fiscal years, India follows April to March, US follows January to December, Australia follows, let's say, June to May. In such a case, we will be creating a separate fiscal year variant. But we don't have that at all now. Let me consider the same thing. I don't know which one to consider because all these are, you know, people are crazy in creating these many. So it's difficult for us to recognize which one is the one. That's fine. Let's select any one of these. Okay, posting period variant. Our variant, I think we have created our own variant. Posting period, I think we have created 1248, right? Posting period MNOP. One two four eight. Okay, so parallel accounting that we'll see later. Now here, if you see local currency, global currency, what would be the, just enter here, it is updating automatically. For currency 10, how do we get? First, it checks the source currency, and based on that, it will get updated to 10 based on the exchange rate maintained for M. So just to save it. Similarly, we will be doing the same thing for BL. We'll be doing BL, and here we have an option to maintain an accounting principle. System is taking time. So I think Raghu, we need to reach out to those people.
Yeah, just send a message.
Mm,
I'll talk to them tonight.
yeah, it's just taking time. Just 2 minutes, I'll finish this session. Okay, data saved. Now double click on this accounting principle. We can enter the relevant accounting principle. So just we will be entering the relevant accounting principles. We have an option to create our own accounting principles, and system will give us some standard accounting principles. We can use them, or if you want to create your own accounting principles, we can also create, but not here. We can see in next steps. Okay, so if you want, you can create your own this thing also, IFRS. So I'm just entering one. Save. So that way we will be doing even it for ledger BL. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so if no questions, let's stop it here.